So my first question to you, Dr. Richards, is of a very practical nature, and it is, what is the optimal setting for a psychedelic experience?
Wow, we can spend a lot of time on that because it means there are so many different psychedelic experiences to begin with. And the optimal setting from the perspective of a institutional review board in a university might be very different from the optimal setting of someone at a retreat center in the future. At Johns Hopkins, we have a wonderful living room-like room where we give psychedelics to people. But outside, all we have is a parking lot. And so we don't take people for walks outside. But that doesn't mean that could not be helpful in some sessions in the latter hours. What is most important, just cut to the chase here, as we say, is that the person who receives the psychedelic, regardless of dosage, does so in a place where he or she feels safe, respected, able to choose to trust his or her own mind, regardless of what emerges, whether it looks dark or bright or scary or beautiful or boring or exciting, but to just be with what emerges within consciousness. And that takes a lot of trust and a feeling of safety. So that is more important than what objects are in the environment. Personally, I like a environment that's comfortable and clean and has some nice art and a good quality music system and things like that. But you could have a good psychedelic experience with no music at all out in nature somewhere as well. The psychedelic really gives access to other states of consciousness. It's like it unlocks a door, gives an opportunity. And what you do with that opportunity depends on your feeling of security and openness, motivation, but also whatever just needs to be attended to within. And then we can talk about this down the road. There's also a basic knowledge of how to navigate in the inner world that it helps to know up front.
Yes, that was a broad.
Are you translating this, or are we all living in English?
We're all living in English, yes.
Oh, thank you. I wish I knew Polish.
Well, I hope it's not necessary, as I assume that the level of English of Polish people is quite good, especially in the academic circles. So I think it's all right. And yeah, this was a broad question that I've asked you, but from that we can move on. Just before, I would like to talk a little bit about your book. I would like to show it. This is an English version here of The Sacred Knowledge. And here is the Polish translation, Święta Wiedza o Psychodelikach, in which book you stress what you've just said, so the importance of feeling comfortable and this basic knowledge of navigating in the inner world. But now I would like to ask you about the necessary essential skills of a person who guides psychedelic sessions. What
Sure.
qualities does such person need?
Be happy to go there. Let me just interject the art on the cover of the English version of the book uh, was done by my partner, Anna Emmett, who actually was born in Poland. So we have a Polish link here. She emigrated to Israel when she was 8 years old. So her Polish is the Polish of an 8-year-old, but at least she speaks it a lot better than I do. Okay, back to our topics here. Skills of guides. Oh, it's the being of the guide more than the knowledge of different techniques that is most important. The ability to be centered, steady, calm, and yet to know when to provide very strong structure. It's more like being a midwife than a car mechanic, if that makes sense.
I see.
Um, and so every dyad, if you will, of patient and therapist, I think is unique. And the art of the therapist is establishing a very deep sense of trust very quickly with very different people. So, you can't just apply something from a research design or a, a book. You have to really kind of tune into this particular person. How do you help this particular person feel safe enough that if during the action of the psychedelic substance he or she feels he or she is dying or going crazy or melting, dissolving, that um, one can allow that to happen. Now, that's a lot of trust to establish in a very rapid way. And we do the best we can. If we can't establish a significant degree of trust, we don't administer the psychedelic. Okay? That's really critical. So who would we hire? If we've got some, it's a few years from now, the drugs are legal, we have psychedelic clinics opening up, and we have to hire some professionals. Who do we hire,
Exactly.
Uh, I would look for people who are pretty well centered and integrated, not dogmatic or pedantic. I'd look for people who have lived rather fully, who have done a little suffering and struggle in life, who have real empathy without falling into the same pit that the patient is in. Okay? Um, Someone who is not tied into language, who realizes that there may be very different ways to express experiences in words. Uh, One thing we know in this field is good atheists can have profound spiritual experiences, and they may or may not call it God, okay? But it's something incredibly meaningful to them, you know? So there's a certain flexibility and openness in regard to language and intellectual concepts that's critical for the effective therapist who is working with psychedelics. I think it helps to have some skills in working with mental imagery, for example.
What do you
If
mean
you
by
see
that?
it, oh, with or without psychedelics, if you're having a waking dream and say you see a staircase or a tunnel or a door opening to a home or something, do you just look at it or do you go in and explore? You know, if you see something frightening, uh, do you look it in the eye and confront it and kind of say, well, hello, what are you doing here? Are you ever scary? What can I learn from you? You know, as opposed to running, panicking, and turning paranoid. Okay. Uh, 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 so there's a valuing and a working with the mental imagery of the human mind as it manifests itself. And that's a skill that can be learned, but it takes a certain amount of courage and curiosity, a bit of the spirit of the explorer, I think.
Yeah, I like very much what you said about the qualities of such a person, because this goes beyond profession, this goes beyond education. This is rather about someone's character and life experience, so to speak. And I agree that it's absolutely crucial. Um,
It's also a practical necessity if psychedelic therapy is going to really get launched in the next few years, say in the treatment of depression and addictions, and if it starts getting integrated into palliative care in oncology centers throughout the world, we're going to need an awful lot of competent psychedelic therapists very fast. And we can't say you have to have 6 years of psychoanalysis, even if that was a good idea. That simply will not work, you know? And so what really matters most in guiding a session, establishing rapport, uh, being ethical and competent, um, I think we need to look not only at psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers and psychiatric nurses, but perhaps also pastoral counselors and chaplains, uh, people who are, especially in the palliative care applications, who are comfortable being with people who are confronting death, you know? Um,
I think in the United States, or at least in some West European countries, there is such profession as death doula. So,
yes,
so you think all kinds of backgrounds are good for such a new job, as I see it, and a new job of a psychedelic sitter, as someone might say, if these personality requirements are met, as I understand.
yeah, I've never liked the word sitter
Okay.
because sometimes you have to be very active and supportive, especially if someone is starting to panic. You can't just sit and observe. You have to be very strongly present at times. Um, but you also have to have the wisdom to know when not to interfere, you know, to be silent, be available, be present, but not need to have an updated report every 5 minutes of what's going on, you know? Um,
Yeah. So just before I move to the next question, what do you think would be the best way to educate such professionals right now in present moment?
You know, I think of the parallel with hospice. You know, a few decades ago, there was only one hospice in the world, uh, Cicely Saunders Place in the United Kingdom. And she was just a well-intentioned doctor who thought that um, patients should be able to have their pets in the room if they're dying, you know? And now, of course, hospices are everywhere and they're covered by health insurance. And there's conferences of hospice workers and so on. And I think that same thing is going to happen with psychedelic therapists. And who do we empower? Who do we authorize? Um, it certainly requires some counseling skills and sensitivities and professional ethics and things like that. So we need some kind of certification process um, and maybe group support, uh, professional organizations. Um, but that's all coming into focus. We're participating in that process right now.
Dr. Richards, I would like to go even deeper into this matter, but I have a huge set of questions and I would like to move on for now. So
Lead the way, my friend.
let's put psychedelics aside for just a second. And I would like to ask you about your experience as a psychotherapist, because for those who may not know, after a psychedelic prohibition was imposed in the United States, you worked as a psychotherapist with no psychedelics. So what psychotherapeutic approach do you find most useful in your work?
Yes, I have had a private practice of clinical psychology um, for many years where I don't use psychedelics, you know. I would think my orientation could be called existential, transpersonal, maybe client-centered at times. I certainly respect the mind of the patient. I'm kind of, as in psychedelic therapy, kind of evoking the healing process from within as opposed to imposing something from without. Um, but as I've said, I think you need to tailor that to each person and each relationship.
I see. So now I would like to ask a question that might seem a little academic, but I'm very curious about your view on certain concepts that might or might not be useful while talking about psychedelic experience and mystical experience in general. So first, I would like to ask you, what is ego?
Well, you know, that's one of these terms that everyone can define themselves. There's no one definition. Uh, I think of my ego as my Bill Richards, okay? You know, the guy who gets out of bed and eats breakfast and goes to work and picks up groceries and comes home and goes to bed in the evening and has friends and relationships, okay? My daily personality in the world. okay? But one thing we discover in psychedelics is that we are more than that. You may know the philosopher, psychiatrist Karl Jaspers, who over and over in his far too many books says man is more than he knows or ever can know of himself. Der Mensch ist mehr als weiß oder von sich wissen kann, okay, in German. That there is a mystery, if you will, within us. There are many different worlds of experiencing. And as William James stressed in The Varieties of Religious Experience back in 1902, we can go through life without suspecting their existence. But then every now and then those states manifest themselves, sometimes with psychedelics, sometimes completely spontaneously, sometimes in sensory isolation or sensory flooding or exceptional sexual encounters or profound involvement in religious rituals or the runner's high. They happen during natural childbirth sometimes to some women. All of a sudden, there's this whole magnificent, awesome world that opens up that you never knew was there. Okay? And so I would define those states as beyond the ego, beyond the everyday personality, but part of being a human being on planet Earth.
Right. So there are certain qualities that people may experience during this mystical state of mind, and we may name a few, but since you use the term sacredness quite a lot in your book, I would like to ask you, what is sacredness, and is it somehow related to ethics?
Yes, sacredness to some is kind of a religiously loaded word. Some people might prefer awesomeness to sacredness, and that's fine. In my book, I am trying to write to the community of religious scholars as well as the psychotherapeutic world. And I do use the word sacred, but you can substitute awesome if you like.
Do you think this is, whatever we call it, this area of sacredness, in your book you compare it to some notions from other religions, like in Zen Buddhism, the void, for example. You stress that in various traditions there might be different notions for more or less the same thing. So my question is, as you said, people can experience this sacredness, let's call it, let's stick to this word, on many occasions, but is it always related to ethical part of human beings, let's say?
Yes. Well, this is a wonderful frontier. One of the insights that go with these mystical states of consciousness for many people is that the most real thing in the universe is this energy we call love. Now that sounds incredibly poetic, but this isn't a mushy human emotion. This is a creative energy, if you will, at the very source of the energy we call consciousness or being or life. It's very hard to put into words. But if indeed the ultimate source within us is an energy of love, you could posit that there is an ethical system built into the human organism, that we are innately ethical. It's not just ideas imposed on us from without, but it comes from very deeply within. And that includes insights in mystical forms of consciousness, like the interconnectedness of us all, what our Hindu friends call the bejeweled net of Indra, that within human consciousness, there is a place, if you will, beyond time and space, where we are all part of a unity, where we're all interconnected, where we really are brothers and sisters in the world. And again, if indeed that is true, that could be seen as an ethical system innate to the human mind. I mean, brothers and sisters can quarrel with one another, but they are interconnected, you know?
Yes, I think it's important to talk about it nowadays because we have a lot of conflicts, and as much as conflicts are imminent, natural, normal, I think that there's a lack of compassion and lack of will among many people to live in peace. And you, like, for people who are interested in psychedelics and mysticism, what you said might seem true, but I think that awareness of this is sorely lacking in contemporary world. That's just my judgment. So I'm just curious.
Of course,
Yes.
let me stress, there are what we call religious or spiritual or mystical experiences. And then there's the matter of integrating them, of applying those insights to everyday life. And some insights seem to almost apply themselves automatically, and others take a lot of effort. That's why we have communities of support called churches and synagogues and mosques and temples, I think, as well as psychedelic societies more and more in different cities, you know. But yeah, that there is a basic insight to integrate. You may know the metaphor in Zen Buddhism of the spiritual quest being like searching for the ox. And you find the footprints and then you sight it and you struggle with it and you ride upon it. You become the ox. There may even be a unitive state where there's no ox and no you at the top of the mountain somewhere. But then the culmination of the religious life is understood to be riding the ox back down to the village at the bottom of the mountain to chop wood and carry water and be a compassionate presence in the everyday world, And that's what we call integrating mystical experiences. And that's a lifelong process, I think, whether they occur with psychedelics or in other ways.
Yeah, I think it's great that you mentioned that, because on the other hand, with people who are very much into mysticism and spiritual experience, there might be the conviction that it's enough to have some kind of spiritual experience, and that's enough, which is not true, as you point out. For now, I would like to go to chapter 12 of your book, which for me was the most touching, probably. And in this chapter called Reflections on Death, you ask a question, quote, "What would civilization look like if most of us no longer feared death? What if life were understood to include states of consciousness expressed both in the context of normally functioning physical organisms and in energetic fields of awareness, quite invisible to ordinary sensory perception?" End of quote. Could you attempt to answer that question?
Well, there was a time when sex was taboo. We never talked about sex in polite company, and the women were not supposed to have orgasms that were enjoyable. Those days are past, and we're quite open about our sexuality now with good judgment and respectful of it as a whole. And maybe the taboo on death can also really change, that there's a lot of unnecessary, if you will, fear and denial and anxiety about death in our world. And most of us, you may have noticed, are mortal. Whether we like it or not, we're kind of on this planet for 100 years at most, and for many people, less than that. What does it mean? Uh, what if we uh, really understood it, accepted it, trusted it, were curious about it as opposed to frightened by it? In the work with cancer patients that my colleagues and I have been doing over the years, typically when a cancer patient experiences a mystical form of consciousness, the patient reports loss of the fear of death. Well, that's pretty profound. But what is so interesting is I have known no one who has wanted to speed up death after that experience. Rather, the present moment opens up and people start living more fully and enjoying relationships. And I suspect their immune systems may even start functioning more effectively. They live until they die. And then they approach death more with openness, like, gee, it looks like it's going to come eventually. It'll be interesting. I wonder what it'll be like. But it's like the terminally ill patient is saying to family and friends, watch me, and I'll show you how to die well and how to live fully right up to your last breath. Now, contrast that with the way we often deal with death. At least here in the United States, we still often put the body in a very expensive casket, sometimes with a red light on the face to make it look lifelike. And people look at the corpse and they say how good he looks. That's called denial of death. I contrast that in my book with being in Varanasi in India, where family members, men, are sitting watching a body burn, and young children are playing right next door, laughing and running, that death is accepted as part of life, you know? Lots of room for adventures here.
Yeah, and I think it is changing in that regard that some people are wanting to speak about it. However, it changed profoundly during last century. For example, Polish writer Andrzej Stasiuk mentions in one of his books that when his grandmother died, she was being cleaned. Her corpse was being cleaned by her neighbors, and
Uh-huh.
the burial took place in the village. So the men neighbors came and took her body to the cemetery, and they walked with the coffin for a few kilometers. So death was very close to us, like in Varanasi, probably. But nowadays, if somebody dies at home, ambulance comes, everything has to be sterile, and the family doesn't even touch the body, probably. So how to convince people, maybe, if that's not too strong, that death is normal, that it's a part of life.
Mhm. Yeah, and also there's a lot of psychological distress in the world, manifested in anxiety and depression, in addictions, and so on, traumas that are caused by our clumsiness in dealing with death. There's a lot of unnecessary suffering that I think would vanish if we had a healthier, more honest, more realistic approach to death in the world. Yeah.
So slowly coming back to an end, I would like to ask you about coming up to the end of the meeting, of course, that's what I mean. I would like to ask you about grieving. Because with this denial of death, sometimes comes difficulty with grieving after the loss of a loved one, for instance.
Yeah.
And my question is, if someone has such trouble, is it good to go to psychedelic therapy, for example? Or would it be better to let this person be with their feelings without any psychedelics?
Yeah. What many people call a bad trip with psychedelics is an encounter with unresolved grief. You know, someone died maybe decades ago, and the person decided to be strong and put the death behind them and not cry or be angry or process the grief much, not to do the grief work. And it appears that those repressed, unexpressed feelings often remain in the body, in physical tension, in headaches, and digestive problems, perhaps heart rhythm problems, you name it, you know? So grieving is a healing process. It's reorienting yourself in the world after the loss of a relationship that was very important. Um, And I'd like to note it's not only the terminally ill patient who has to grieve, or I was going to just the opposite, not only the survivors, but the terminally ill patient has to grieve too. They're approaching death, letting go of everything they've known, saying goodbye to family members. That's not easy, you know? But when it's openly expressed and shared, it can be incredibly meaningful and even sometimes humorous and playful, you know? It's part of life.
Dr. Richards, thank you most kindly for your thoughts. And for now, I think it's time for me to step back for a while at least. And I would like to give space for other participants to ask their questions. And regarding that, I have a technical thing to share. So if there's anyone who would like to ask a question, please use the reaction button, which is on the right side of your Zoom window, and just let me know that you want to ask a question. Then I give you the voice and you may ask your question. But before this, let's just make up to 4 minutes break and let's meet here with some new ideas, hopefully. Is that all right?
I'll see you in 4 minutes.
See you in 4. All right, everybody. I'll just like to explain one thing because I see that the Zoom window has changed since I was doing it last time. So what I mean by using reactions, if you have the menu on the bottom of your Zoom window, there is the reactions button, and you have to click it and click raise your hand like this. So it will be clear for me you want to ask the question, and short announcement in Polish for those who like a question but maybe don't know how to phrase it in English. Jeśli ktoś ma pytanie, a nie wie jak je sformułować po angielsku, może napisać na czacie po polsku i ja przetłumaczę, albo może powiedzieć po polsku i też przetłumaczę. Także zapraszam do zadawania pytań. All right, so before anyone makes a decision, I would like to go a little bit into the past, maybe, if you will, Dr. Richards. And
I'll go everywhere with you.
Splendid. So you have started, let's say, psychedelic research in the 1960s. So for those who don't know, you were a participant in the study conducted by a German scientist, Hanscarl Leuner, in Göttingen. And you, during this study, you were given a variety of doses of psilocybin. And later on, when you got back to the United States, you became a psychedelic researcher yourself. But my curiosity is, what motivated you to go to Germany in the first place as a student?
Well, at that time, believe it or not, I was 23 years old once. And at that time, I was studying at the Yale Divinity School, a 3-year program in theological studies with different specializations. And at the end of the first year, I had the opportunity to study abroad, and I chose Göttingen. I wanted to go where there weren't any other Americans. So I could really immerse myself in another culture for a year. And that's where I had my first psychedelic experience. And this was before I even had heard the word psychedelic. I had no idea what psilocybin was. There was simply a research project in the clinic around the corner with a new drug that was alleged to evoke memories from early childhood. And I thought that sounded interesting. And so I volunteered. And by some miracle, without supportive setting, a very positive experience occurred of a mystical nature. And I became known in the clinic as that interesting American who had the mystical experience. And then I began volunteering in the German clinic where LSD and psilocybin were still legal, guiding English-speaking people, especially through sessions. And so I've been guiding sessions now for 60 some years. Yeah.
That's absolutely stunning. So I'm curious, what was the, using the German term Zeitgeist in the 1960s, where psychedelics were getting more popular?
Yeah.
What was the general feeling? And do you have maybe some special memories of yourself from that time?
Oh, very definitely. It was a very different era. It's hard to even imagine. I mean, psychedelics were legal. They were uncontroversial. It was a perfectly acceptable thing to give LSD to a graduate student if he wrote a good report. You know, it's a non-toxic drug. Why not? What's the big deal? It's not even addictive, you know? Just an interesting new compound that arrives from Sandoz Pharmaceuticals in the mail. And for any psychiatrist to try out with his patients, you know, very different time. Um, Also within the research community, there was not yet, at least in Germany, uh, understanding of the importance of set and setting of your mental state and your preparation and the environment and so on. So Hanscarl Leuner, a wonderful man, had written a monograph called The Experimental Psychosa, The Experimental Psychoses. And it was thought then, because high doses almost always made people psychotic, paranoid, panic, you know, confused, that maybe psychedelics would help us understand psychosis and schizophrenia, severe manic depressive states and so on. And that's exactly when I arrived on the scene. And instead of getting psychotic, I had this incredibly meaningful and beautiful experience that is echoed in many of the religious traditions of the world. So it opened up a whole new domain of study.
Yeah, I would be very much willing to go deeply into this if we have time, but meanwhile, we have a question on chat. I'm gonna read out loud. Reports and descriptions of psychedelic experiences mainly focus on mind and quote unquote spiritual part of the process. How to deal with purely physiological body reactions, which could be tricky and rapid, let's say dirty, from the perspective of person who is guiding this kind of therapy.
In terms of being well prepared to benefit from a psychedelic session, uh, one needs to be prepared to confront anything that looks frightening. One needs to turn off the rational mind with its language centers and kind of collect experiences instead of trying to think during the period of drug action. But the third important thing which you're addressing is that one has to work with honor physiological sensations, the language of the body, the language of psychosomatic medicine. And so, for example, if you feel nausea, you don't just complain about the nausea, you dive into your stomach. You accept the nausea, and usually it vanishes instantly. If there's a minor tremor in an arm or a leg, instead of fighting it, you exaggerate it a bit. There's some tension that's being expressed in the language of the body. if you discover your arms moving as if you're doing modern dance or conducting a symphony orchestra, not that you're doing it, you just notice your arms are behaving that way, like they're on automatic pilot. You allow that to happen. It's a language of expressing through the soma, okay? And so you work with the body during the action of a psychedelic. There may be times where the body goes into a very deep trance. You can hardly detect breathing, and there's not much movement, But there are other times where the body is expressed within the musculature and the systems of the body.
Yeah, so thank you, Magda, for this question. I think it's good to accept this experience 100% as a patient. Don't judge it and not necessarily analyze it while it's happening. Don't you agree?
Yeah, especially those of us who are well educated. Our favorite defense mechanism is intellectualization. And we sometimes want to say, stop the world. I got to figure out what's happening. I got to label this. Where is this coming from? What does this mean? That's resistance. That's fighting the experience. And when the ego is chattering and trying to control and trying to use language, there's no way it can be transcended, and the other deeper, more profound states of consciousness can manifest themselves. So again, the importance of trust to allow that to happen. This is fascinating. I'll think about it later.
We have another question on chat from Michał. Taking into account the potent, seemingly universal healing effects of mystical experiences, what would say that is changed thanks to them? Is it some specific schemas regarding oneself, others, and the world itself, or something different that gets transformed? I'm thinking about it from the perspective of memory reconsolidation process.
Fascinating frontier. Mikhail, you got to write some good papers about this, Who knows? What can I say? Give me a few more words to trigger my thoughts, if you will.
Should I reread the question?
Would you please?
Taking into account the potent, seemingly universal healing effects of mystical experiences, what would you say that is changed thanks to them?
Yes. When a mystical experience occurs, and that we have a definition of that with different categories: unity, transcendence of time and space, intuitive knowledge, sacredness, deeply felt positive mood, and claims of ineffability and paradoxicality. When that occurs, it's hard to talk about it because, in a sense, your ego wasn't even there. You died. You were transcended. And yet, when you were reborn, you discovered this memory. It's there, and it feels more real than life right now, more fundamental. There's something inherently convincing about it. Could be a big delusion, but it sure is convincing when it happens, okay? It feels like Paul Tillich, the theologian, calls it the ground of being. Very, very powerful. But when that is in your memory, indelibly in your memory, your concept of who you are has changed. and also your concept of who other people are, and maybe what the nature of reality is. You may be more open to thinking like quantum physicists, you know? We really don't know what consciousness is yet. We know that we're all conscious, but we can dissect a lot of brains and we can't find a person anywhere, It's a whole other realm. It's a frontier of psychology and of physics and of the very nature of reality. So welcome to the club, guys. Yeah.
That's another question that I would like to get back to, but for now, Justina, please.
Yeah, thanks. You already started answering my question, I guess. Thank you very much for finding time and an interesting conversation. I wonder how your personal psychedelic experiences, your research on psychedelics and observations of experiences of other people change your own personal metaphysical belief.
My own personal what?
Metaphysical beliefs concerning the nature of mind, nature of self, and the structure of reality.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. I did grow up in a very beautiful part of the world, close to nature, in a Protestant church that valued prayer and conversion experiences and so on. I think I grew up with a sense of, if you will, the sacred or the beautiful, that there were religious values. I did say my prayers as a child, but I had no concept before psychedelics of what the Hindus mean by the Atman-Brahman unity, the drop of water of the everyday self merging with the ocean of Brahman. Okay. And one of the most fascinating parts of this research frontier for the psychology of religion, especially, is that we used to talk about Western religion, Western mysticism, religious experience, if you will, and Eastern. That in Western there was relating to the personal manifestation of the divine, to Jesus or the Virgin Mary or Kuan Yin or Fatima Zahra or whatever. And so-called Eastern religions was this more abstract, unitive state of consciousness. Now, through psychedelic research, there's very good evidence that the same person, whether born in the East or the West, can experience both of those states of consciousness. You can indeed have very meaningful visionary experiences where the ego is still intact, relating, interacting, beholding a vision of deep meaning and significance. But you can also go into this state where the ego kind of melts into what the Buddhists might call the void, beyond, and yet, and that's where we get into the paradoxes. When you try to express those states, it's very frustrating for academicians. I died, but I was never so alive. Ultimate reality was one, but it contained everything that is. It was personal, but it was more than the personal. It was the very source of love, et cetera, et cetera. And you may know the symbol of Taoism, the white dot in the black field and the black dot in the white field. that when you come to trying to express these mystical insights in language, it's always both and instead of either or. And that's very frustrating for academicians who like to write books, you know. It's great for poets and dancers and artists and musicians, but it's hard for those of us who are attached to words.
Thanks, Justina, for breaking the taboo of asking the question out loud. Are there any more questions? And first of all, do you have time for more questions, Dr. Richards?
Yes, I have some more time, yes.
Okay, guys, so the opportunity is yours. Meanwhile, I just wanted to go back to your book when you were speaking about this division of Eastern and Western mysticism, but the unity of mystical experience. I remembered a fragment from your book when you describe your visit in Tibet. And you mentioned that you visited some Dalai Lama's relatives and you wanted to talk about spirituality about them. And if we have some time, I would like to read a fragment
Sure.
from this book. One topic my mind seized upon was Tibetan music, with its orchestration of unique horns, drums, cymbals, and gongs. I had heard of theories that different piercing or reverberating frequencies of sound might evoke various discrete phenomena within human consciousness, and had listened to monks gutturally chanting Om Mani Padme Hum, roughly homage to the jewel in the center of the lotus, in the temple of the Dalai Lama, with occasional bursts of instrumental accompaniment. Tenzin, I said, I'd be interested to learn something from you about Tibetan music and its relationship to consciousness. After a calming pause, he smiled and answered, Bill, if you want to know the music that moves me most deeply spiritually, it is Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. So I really like that because it shows, to me, it reminds me that we are sometimes getting very fixated on a particular culture or on a particular music that seems spiritual to us. But the reality is, you don't need to get, your bucket full of water to do it. You don't need to go to the other side of the lake. Where you are just where you stay. You can still get the access to the source. So that was one of my favorite humorous fragments from the book.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, we underestimate what we have to give the world in our so-called Western classical music. Yeah. One piece of music we use a lot during psychedelic sessions is Goretzky's Third Symphony.
Symphony of the Sorrowful Songs.
Yes, that's powerful psychedelic experience when that soprano breaks through. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. You can have a valuable psychedelic experience in total silence, though that's hard to come by. But music provides a nonverbal support structure if it's well selected, especially music that has a kind of an unfolding, developing structure. And it becomes sort of like the net of a trapeze artist. If you don't need it, you forget that it's there. But if you start to get anxious or frightened, it's immediately there to pick you up and transport you and be supportive. And it can also be incredibly beautiful in itself. Music we call great is called great for a reason. It goes very deep into the human psyche.
Yeah, we have another question on chat. First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Richards, for sharing your wealth of knowledge and lived experience. You mentioned in the beginning of this discussion your experience of love as central to your mystical experience. Would you care to elaborate? Thank you.
I'd rather give each of you a hug. Okay. At the end of Dante's Divine Comedy, interesting, the word comedy, he says it is love that moves the sun and other stars. Maybe Dante was a mystic, okay? And that deep within the psyche is often felt this universal creative energy, for want of a better word. And many would call that God or ultimate reality or the ground of being. The biologist Edmund Sinnott at Yale called it the purposive properties of protoplasm, But there is something very deep in the core of our being that's very creative, beautiful, powerful, and evokes, I think, perhaps all the religious systems, or most of them, of the world. This is what we call revelation in religious language. Yeah. Augustine says, love and do what you want, okay?
One more time, sorry.
Saint Augustine,
Yeah.
One of his lines was, love and do whatever you want.
Love and do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
That's the basis of ethics.
Yeah, thank you. I just didn't hear it very well. We've got two more questions. First, Michał and then Justyna. Michał Jasiński.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Richards, for sharing this beautiful knowledge. And yeah, my other question would be about the inner healer concept. I'm very curious to know what's your opinion on this concept regarding the. Well, I have a personal doubt. Is the inner healer always enough? Because I have a sensation that from some perspectives, quite a lot of kind of pressure is put on the inner healer, yeah, that your inner healer should do the work. But what about the situations when there's a lot of relational trauma of abandonment and so on? My guess is that maybe then the inner healer is not enough, and some additional help, either during the psychedelic session / ceremony or after it, would be needed to bring the transformation process to a successful end. So I'm curious to hear your opinion on that.
Well, there's a lot to say triggered by that. I personally haven't liked the term the inner healer. It sounds a little new agey to me, and yet I know what my colleagues mean by it. My favorite term would be the entelechy, i.e. the meaningful unfolding of the interpersonally grounded psyche. Sounds a little more philosophical. But the essence of psychedelic therapy, as I see it from these years of collected experience, is that when a person goes into the mind with a feeling of interpersonal grounding or trust and courage and motivation and the willingness to confront and go through any suffering that may emerge, when that is in place, if there's guilt, grief, anger, confusion, childhood trauma, you progress in and through it, affirming trust in the therapeutic relationship and the resources of your own mind. And when that happens, what Karl Jaspers called the unbedingte Forderung, the how's that translated? The essentially the creative energy of love manifests, is encountered in the depths of the psyche. And that promotes the healing process. And you could call that the inner healer, if you will. Now, some people may need more than one session. They may need a process of therapy with low dose and high dose sessions to work through fears and trauma. You know, it's not automatic, but that basic principle of in and through, confronting with trust and courage, and having the attitude, there is nothing that manifests in my mind that I need to run away from. If it comes into awareness, that means I'm ready to deal with it. And I appreciate the companionship of my therapist in the process. Okay? That's psychedelic therapy.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Justina, please.
Thanks. So I wonder, because in many religious traditions and in psychedelic experiences, especially in DMT experiences, you can encounter, let's say, beings of religion or entheogenic entities. And I wonder, what is your take on the ontological status of this kind of entities, and whether you think they can support our therapeutic process, or maybe they bring any danger to it? What do you think?
Yeah, I hear your question, and that's a topic that's been debated a lot and will be debated more. But in my experience, the entity, the visionary figure, if you will, animal, human, mythological, whatever it is an invitation to resolution and knowledge. In the ayahuasca religions of South America, there's a tradition of what do you do if you see the giant anaconda serpent? Well, you know, if you try to run from it, he's going to chase you and you're going to get into panic and paranoia. Not helpful. So no, what do? If you see the giant anaconda, you dive into his mouth and look out through his eyes. You become the anaconda, your Shakti, your Kundalini, your psychic energy, okay? And it's that principle. If there's a monster, a boogeyman, a dragon, you essentially say, well, hello, are you ever big and scary? Interesting though, why are you here? Why am I experiencing you? What are you made of? What can I learn from you? And instead of running from it, you go towards it, almost like saying, come on, explain yourself. What are you doing in my mind? And you might reach out for the hand of your therapist when you do that. But essentially, as you dive into the eyeball of the monster, like diving into a swimming pool, there's resolution, there's insight. The monster becomes your alcoholic father in the middle of the night, or an expression of your fears or guilt or whatever it is. But there's insight and there's healing. So I would say there is nothing to fear. If it comes into awareness, greet it as an old friend. It may be a child in a scary Halloween mask. Okay.
That's profoundly interesting and important question as well. And you write about it in your book quite a lot, I think, about fear. And you also give an interesting example from your therapeutic practice with a patient who was very afraid of a snake that he saw, but I wouldn't go anywhere further because I don't want to make a spoiler here for the people who haven't read it yet. So I think we are now really coming to an end as we want to respect Dr. Richard's time. So maybe there will be time for one more question if one of you decides, but really last one. And I will just make a short announcement that after the meeting is over, I will still be here for some time. If anyone wants to get some more information about uniMIND or about Mind Foundation, or if anyone wants to volunteer, as I do for the Mind Foundation, maybe create their own uniMIND group, then I will be willing to give some advice and information.
Let me just offer in closing here, the observation that psychedelics have been around probably since the dawn of man, and they have emerged in many cultures and been suppressed and emerged and suppressed, very much like mushrooms. They're there and they're gone. And right now they are emerging in our Western culture in the early 21st century. And it is my hope, and I think some of you may share this, that we have finally evolved enough to integrate them responsibly and effectively into our culture. The benefits could be immense in terms of mental health and also applications perhaps in education and religion. So those of you who feel a desire to pursue this field, you have my blessings and my good wishes. You are needed. We need competent psychedelic therapists in the next few years. And it's incredibly meaningful work.
Thank you, Dr. Richards. I'm a little bit speechless because I got emotional after what you've just said. So I just hope it's not our last meeting, and I hope we could discuss the matters that we've started discussing today again. And thank you most kindly for your presence, for what you're doing, and for meeting you.
I would say namaste. I honor the divine within each of you.